Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So here I want to share my fighter tank build. This will get you all your main stats maxed out, plus a ton of hit points, ready for the ultimate challenge of any content in the game. We'll discuss what you can use, what alternatives, and ultimately how you can build up your own character for yourself. You do not need to copy exactly what I have. There'll be timestamps on the play bar below where you can skip to any section you're most interested in. But let's go to powers and talk about how to actually play the fighter tank. Well, for the at-wills, I recommend Tide of Iron plus Brazen Slash. That's it. You generally won't attack while blocking, and you won't really need Threatening Rush. But if you really need extra threat, you can use Threatening Rush plus Tide of Iron for the maximum gains. You'll cast Tide of Iron every 5 seconds to gain that increased threat generation, which is basically increasing your damage by 500%, at least what the enemy thinks you do. Brazen Slash is for the stamina regen. Then for the encounter powers, I highly recommend running Enforced Threat and getting used to it. Sometimes you're going to have to do like tank switches, and you're going to want to make sure that this targets maybe one boss and not the other. You can simply do that by positioning. The radius is 30 feet. Learn what that distance is for you. You can jump to some dummies and you can see exactly how far away the enemy needs to be so that you only affect like this one and not that one. You see what I mean? So you can position yourself and use that to put yourself on top of the threat list of the enemy. But the massive benefit of this is you're reducing the enemy's awareness by 10%. All enemies within 30 feet. It's like the best damage buff in the game that any tank has. From there, I highly recommend Knight's Valor. The benefits of this just far outweigh anything. It can feel like you're cheating though, because of the amount of threat it can give you. And that's why some people will decide not to use it because they think they're better than that. However, it's not just for the threat, but also for the stamina regeneration. Every second while this is active, it also triggers Steel Recovery, giving you massive amounts of stamina regen. It's just really useful. And it has a shorter cooldown compared to like Knight's Challenge, which you would otherwise use for stamina. So it's just great and has the ability to protect an ally from the damage that they would take. For the third encounter power, depends on the content. I like to use Line Breaker. However, you could use Shield Throw. It just depends on this feat down here. Because I really like to have it for threat all the time, I may as well have the extra threat benefit it gives me, which is also 500%. It's like a huge buff. And so you can use that with this feat. And thus you don't want to use Shield Throw. But the benefit of Shield Throw, you would take this feat if you do use it, is the fact it's ranged 50 feet. It can help you peel off an enemy, or if there's a boss sitting in the corner, perhaps the Saboteur with a bunch of traps, and you need to threaten it without you being next to it, then this can be helpful. And that's why you would take this feat if you wanted to use that power. But if you do what I do and take Staying Power, then you would run like a Line Breaker. Again, for threat, and it's also a multi-target threat, as you can see you cast that here. It puts a cone and you attack everything there. And it's also a bit of a lunge effect as well, having that range 55 feet. However, if you need some survivability, do not be afraid to use Iron Warrior here. That's probably the best one you can use. If you need to take a big hit and can prepare for it, Iron Warrior is the best, 20% damage reduction. Every other ability has some use in some situation, whether that's for just damage, crowd control, so on. You will have some people using Anvil of Doom plus Anvil of Challenge, but I just never found it worth it compared to just using Enforced Threat, and then it frees up a class feature slot as well. You don't have to use that. And Enforced Threat is just too good to reduce the enemy's awareness. It's like, I don't know why people give up using that. Moving on to your daily powers. You're using Second Wind to absorb a bit more damage. This is when you're on a maxed out build like I am, where you can end up with all these green 90%. If you're still developing your character, I would recommend Bladed Rampart plus this Sharpened Senses feat. giving you 30% awareness. It can be really good for that stat boost to help you take a big hit. Second wind is what we use when we have those stats maxed out because there's not better options. Unfortunately, Phalanx will make it so you cannot block while using it. It's only to protect the team. There is some benefits with Determination plus Perfect Block, but it's very situational. You cannot rely on it because of the 3-minute cooldown. Otherwise, you're using Earth Shaker for just damage. At the beginning of the fight, you want to maintain threat, hit the boss with Earth Shaker, ideally within the artifact call, combine that with a gear piece with the Manticore's Bite, massive amounts of damage, massive amounts of threat, and you should not be losing it from there. Your mechanics, you have this block. Whenever you're going to get hit, you can go and block this attack on your shield, and that shield is just another layer of hit points, which equals 40% of your maximum hit points. Additionally, you have Dig In, which is like on PC your tab mechanic, and here you basically increase your block up to 60%. And you also gain the extra benefit of whenever you get hit, you can trigger a power called Retaliate. So going back to Dig In, it also has a massive benefit of giving you 15% awareness. So you can very reliably run with just 75% awareness, and when you go into this Dig In, you have 90%. And whenever you're going to take a big hit, make sure you're using that ability. But in most cases, you can pretty much dig in and block every single hit. The reason you'll want to is for your Retaliate as well. So whenever you're getting hit, use your Dig In. When you're not, attack a bit, and you just keep alternating between that. And you do our Retaliate again. Basically, that is when you go out of Dig In just as you've been hit, and it deals massive amounts of damage with increased threat, and you can increase that damage a bit further with the feat Shake It Off. Moving to the class features, there's not a lot of great options. I just recommend Steel Recovery again combined with Knight's Valor for insane stamina regen. From there, I just go with movement speed because the other options are just not great. The stamina regen, unfortunately, from this feat is abysmally low. It's like 2%. You can just go with movement speed instead, and the rest are pretty pointless as well. Usually you're dead before you're at 25% health, but you can always run that too if you don't need the movement speed. Moving on to the feats, again, I use Staying Power, but don't be afraid to just use Shield Thrower and then use like Shield Throw as one of your threat abilities here. If you're not using that feat and using this instead, I recommend Line Breaker here. Second pair of feats, they don't really matter, to be honest. You can go with Rising Tide, it doesn't do a whole lot though either. Third set of feats, just go with Combat Balance. Doesn't really matter about your stats, you'll still get a bit of resistance there, just don't worry too much about it. Fourth set of feats, again, depends what you're using. If you're a newer tank, recommend Bladed Rampart for the stats and use that power as your defensive power. Whenever you're taking lots of damage, pop this, and otherwise Perfect Block if you're just going to be using Second Wind anyway, and there's some situations you might use that daily. And lastly, Shake It Off. You can make use of Deep Breathing if you don't need the extra magnitude damage on Retaliate, which we kind of don't. If you know what you're doing, you won't need that damage, you won't need that threat, and you can sometimes make use of this, potentially at the start of a fight, or if there's just phasing and you're just sitting there anyway. That is about it. Again, it's pretty straightforward how to play tank, just you'll need to learn mechanics of particular content. So make sure you, in particular, are watching the guides to certain content if you want that extra information. Otherwise, you're going in blind, and then you need to be really focused on what is your enemy doing, what are their patterns, what you need to keep an eye out, their debuffs they're giving you, what they do. And there's a lot of learning just mechanic wise, figuring out what your enemy's doing and you using your abilities to counter it, blocking at the right time, using defensive abilities at the right time. And there's a bit of a learning curve to that. I can't just say do this, and it won't always work for all content. Each content can be quite different, especially when going into master content and endgame. In terms of holding threat at the beginning of a boss fight, I can help you out with that. You have a bit of a rotation and things to keep in mind. So first of all, you want to get combat advantage against your target. So you have this purple arc. Then you're going to use your artifact and your mount power. And from there, you need to squeeze all of your things in within the 10 seconds, ideally. You're going to go with a Tide of Iron artifact, then mount, then like your belt item, Knight's Valor, Enforced Threat, Line Breaker, Daily Power, block an enemy attack, get Retaliate off during the artifact call, and that's it. Use Enforced Threat when it's off cooldown, use Line Breaker when it's off cooldown, use Tide of Iron every 5 seconds, and you should be sorted. In between, just absorb enemy damage using the dig in most of the time. You won't really need to use your standard block, and that's it, to be honest. You need practice and timing to get used to particular bosses and how they react and what you need to be doing. But if you follow that power rotation, you shouldn't have any trouble holding the threat and making sure the enemy is attacking you and not your allies. But from there, let's move on to your stats. So as a tank, you want to focus on defense, awareness, and critical avoidance, and then maximum hit points, at least as a fighter tank. You generally don't want to worry about deflect or deflect severity. Keep in mind, you only need your awareness at 75% and you only need your critical avoidance at 80%, because when you go dig in, you get those free stats and you're good. You can also leave your defense at about 84% and use the boon Blessed Resilience to get the 6%. From there, if you have free stats, don't be afraid to throw them into your incoming healing and pick up some stamina regen. Moving on to our gear and alternatives that you can use, we have this setup. The rugged helmet for the Manticore's Bite. This comes from Dragon Hunts with your Dragon Slayer campaign. You can get an alternative from Chult Hunts, the main of the Manticore. For the armor, an alternative would just be the rugged one from Dragon Hunts. For the arms, these are from Dragon Hunts. Just get those. Alternatively, you could use the Abyss ones from the Demon Web Pit's Dungeon Master, and then instead you could have some pants with the Herald's Decree that you get like Seals of the Spider. Weapons, you want to use ones to support the team. We have the Duergar ones. You can get probably cheaper Feywood ones or Mastered ones. They all have the same bonus. But don't be afraid to use the newer ones, like these mythic ones from the Moondancer trial, or even just the legendary ones from the advanced version of that trial. They can be useful for just the damage resistance. The rugged boots again from Dragon Hunts. An alternative is the wisps from Avernus Hunts. For the neck and the waist piece, this is from the Master Tiamat trial. I would recommend it. However, you can easily do with just the Valhalla set. Buy that set from the auction house, should be pretty cheap. For the rings, you want to have a ring with a charging bull. So when you have lots of enemies around you, you're just going to run around a bit and you'll easily draw their threat. There's alternatives, the Celerity ring from Dragon Hunts, the Ring of the Condemned on the auction house. You can combine that with the Ring of the Overwhelmed. And otherwise, we have a Topaz ring here just for the forte pretty much. We aren't really worrying about the deflect or deflect severity, even though when we do have our daily power full, it will give us a bit of a boost in those deflection stats, which is useful in multi-target content when you have lots of enemies beating on you. And that comes from the Master Demon Web Pit's dungeon. You could use Lothian Spite for incoming healing, Alistre's Grace for team support, Abyssal Loop for the Manticore Bite, and switch your helmet to I don't know what else. There's not really any good options. And then your shirt and pants. You can use these new ones like I have here just for item level and a bit of stats, and their bonuses are okay-ish, especially the pants for taking a big hit. If you can have the stamina above that, it's pretty nice. But you can get alternatives from like just Seals of the Spider and from Dragon Hunts, and also from heroic encounters in the Demon Web Pits. Moving on, we go to enchantments and artifacts. So here we just have this. It only matters in defense. We got an amethyst and some jades. In utility, a garnet, but we could have a cobalt here for incoming healing if you didn't need the stats. We got an unholy protection for the defense stats and a resiliency of the depths for the damage reduction. A flash freeze because we don't need any stats, so this helps just a little bit. And movement speed here. You could run recharge speed though if you didn't need movement speed. In terms of artifacts, your primary one, you want one that's going to support the team. That is going to be any of the top ones on this list here, like the top 12. Then you want to have secondaries as stamina regen artifacts and of course the one to complete your set. The other stamina regen artifacts are as follows, and right now from the Winter Festival you can get the Beacon of Cimmeral. Then we go to our race and ability scores. I recommend going with the race of Drow, that's what I have. It's going to support the team with the Dark Fire, but you can run with a Renegade Drow, you can run with a Dwarf, anything that's going to give these defensive stats. Even Tiefling is okay as well. But for the ability scores, you want to be focusing generally Constitution and Charisma. You could switch Charisma over to Strength for the stamina regen if you wanted to, or if you felt you needed that. Moving on, we go to our companions. Here you want to have a summoned one that's going to support the team. So you would want the top ones from this list, and we have Drizzt right now. Then for companion gear, we're just using, again, focusing on those stats, but this is from the Crown of Keldagorn trial, crit avoidance and incoming healing. It's bound to account, so I can transfer it between characters. But if you want to min-max, you could go to the Light of Xeraxis and buy some companion gear that would fit you with regards to your defensive stats. Then for our companion enhancement here, we want one that's going to support the team. So you would want to go with one of these 6. We're going with Armor Break right now. Just check what other people are using and don't use the same ones. For the companion equip bonuses, we have a Tamed Raptor to support the team, the Lich with the damage resistance, Bruner with awareness and defense, Diva for crit avoidance and incoming healing, and the Golden Deep Crow for awareness. Keep in mind you can use a lot of different alternatives to get like the same amount of stats here. Here is a list of the different companions and the different bonuses they can give you. If we needed extra crit avoidance, you could use the Duergar Guard instead of the Diva Champion. Or if you don't have the Deep Crow, you can use alternatives to give you that awareness. But let's move on to our mounts. Here in our current tab, we want a combat power that's going to support the team. Again, this is just a list of them. You want to have like the top 4 ideally. Now for the defense of the Moondancer trial, the Bat Swarm is really good because it's going to break you out of any control effects, including the boss's stun before the tank buster. So you can use this power, break free of the stun, and then make sure you're actually blocking for the tank buster. For the equip bonus, you want one that's going to support the team, so like Pack Tactics, Runic Aura, and then there's also Mystic Aura. In our stable here, it doesn't matter so much, but I like to have a Tacticians for the cooldown reduction, have some Protector's Covenants for the extra stats, have a Shepherd's Devotion for the movement speed when you use a daily power, also giving your teammates defense, have a Knight's Condemnation for a bit of healing when you take that combat advantage damage, and then the insignias themselves is just Courage are the blue ones, and Fortitude are like, yeah, the brown ones. And then the colors, you want to have like your stamina regen, your incoming healing, and like a recharge speed. That's kind of the best ones. Counter power damage here, but it doesn't really matter. And then rough faster diamonds also doesn't really matter. Then we go to our boons. Now, I don't have a lot of boons on my fighter, but you would go with something like this. Get all the hit points and defensive stats, get that movement speed, get the forte, the incoming healing, the stamina regen. From there, you can get recharge speed and extra point as well, but make sure you're getting blessed resilience here. You can also from there get your enhanced application and also your blessed advantage. For the stronghold, we just have power here, awareness, and revive sickness. If we're going to die, we don't want to lose that extra hit points, so have that there. And lastly, consumables and belt items. So on this build, I recommend just running Caprice, Chocolate, Guild Food, Elixir of Steadfast Devotion, and a Defense Potion. On the belt item, Stone of Health, Dragonfire, and a Chain of Scales. Ideally getting that to Mythic. You can look up guides how to upgrade it and get it. Dragonfire, optional. It's great. It's the best belt item for damage and threat, but yeah, it's not the end of the world if you don't have it. That is ultimately my build. Again, it's kind of overkill. You don't even need all these stats for endgame content. You can do away with a lot less. I posted a gameplay video just yesterday running the Moondancer trial on its maximum difficulty, Master, with pretty scuffed stats and a pretty low end build as well. I was only just getting to like 81,000 item level with the items I was using. This build goes up to 87,000, gets you all the stats you need to survive anything in there, and in any content pretty much as well. You're just gonna be a beast of the tank with this kind of setup. But don't be afraid to go more budget and use some more accessible options to you, depending on what content you're running. Again, just prioritize those stats, how I mentioned. Once again, a massive thank you to all of these channel members for their added support, and I'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.